Welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton.
And I'm Alan Chappell, and this podcast goes deep into the practices of big tech
And the future of the world.
We explore how companies like Google, Meta, and Apple are impacting each of our lives.
I'm an investigative reporter.
And I'm a privacy lawyer.
And every week we speak with experts to bring the unreported details into the light. To every publisher I meet bemoans the shrinkage of the ad market. Every day it's getting harder, they tell me. Clients and agencies just aren't spending money anymore. But that's not true, and it's not been true for 20 years because the ad market is growing strongly. It grew in double digits last year and tens of billions of more dollars were being spent. It's this that's been driving the growth of the world's largest ad companies, which are now, in order, Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft. It used to be the media companies or the press media companies, but now it's the tech companies. And the uncomfortable truth for publishers, and the one that they don't really want to admit, is that there is heady and frothy growth. It's just passing them by. And the reason for this is known and it's proven. It's just easier, more measurable, and cheaper for clients and agencies to buy their ads from the platforms these days. The tech industry has invested very heavily in automating for efficiency, while publishers, who could and should have done it, have spent little and done nothing. I've been in the meetings at the publishers, and there were a lot of meetings, I can tell you, with very important people where they talked about solving this problem, but never did. They talked big about getting in the fight, but then did nothing. And they were all talk and no trousers. And even today, meetings that I have with publishers all the time, to try and get them to collaborate around a single solution for advertising, they still say no. I haven't yet found a single country willing to collaborate on a platform. It's a classic story of business failure, and it feels a bit like an opportunity lost for the news industry. But moaning about it isn't getting anybody anywhere. And just when all looked lost and publishers were deciding never to worry about advertising in the future and find new ways to make money, we're suddenly finding that some of those massive tech companies are facing antitrust suits and breakups. Google's had theirs already. Meta and Amazon have theirs coming. And it may be that the advertising market's about to be reopened. This may create a window again for publishers to get back into the advertising game. Now, today, Alan and I are joined by a guest. We're joined by Erez Levin, who spent 13 years at Google, including roles in DV360, which is one of the major advertising products that I hear talked about in newsrooms every single day. And he also worked as the transformation lead working in the largest global ad agencies and holding groups. So today, we had a chat just before we came on air. We all agree that our job here is to be truth tellers, to bring all of the elements of this three-party internet together to try and see what we can learn. And so, Erez, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Go, Alan.
I've known Erez I've known of Erez. Erez is one of those people that you sort of follow on social media and you go, that dude is pretty smart. And then we met about a month ago over a pint of beer and had a really nice chat and really shared, I think, some war stories, because Erez really knows where the bodies are buried over at Google and has a really good understanding of how, at least from the buy side, the digital media world operates. And so I'm just super excited to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on, Erez.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So, Erez, can you just start by telling us a little bit about what you did at Google, how you ended up there, what your role specifically was?
Yeah, so I had a couple of roles and kind of a couple of careers within Google, but really the last decade was when I switched over to the DoubleClick world, into the programmatic world. I was on the AdX buy side for a while, which is basically representing our exchange, connecting it to all of the DSPs out there, so all of the supply that Google had. And then I switched over to DV360, where I was managing all of the exchange integrations into DV360. And so I always sort of sat, really for those 10 years, really at the epicenter, right in between supply and demand, which not that I, make the world about me sitting in the center of it, but truly in a market where supply and demand meet is kind of, I think, what defines the market. And the supply landscape, I think in hindsight, I can look back and where my role was really interesting, especially at the time, the supply landscape was evolving very, very quickly. New formats, new environments, where how people were consuming media, and the buy side didn't necessarily keep up. And so that was my role, was constantly trying to see sort of like, where was supply not being properly valued, where was supply going that we needed to prepare the buy side. And I was constantly kind of playing whack-a-mole, to be honest, and trying to match that up. In sort of, again, in hindsight, I think the diagnosis that I have is that the buyers didn't necessarily keep up with quality measures, and so they sort of let historic legacy measurement be the default, and didn't keep up, which they needed to do.
Interesting. So here's an interesting insight, perhaps. Let's get straight into it. One of the things that gets lost in this conversation, I always laugh that the publishing industry speaks fluent French and the advertising industry speaks fluent Swahili. We're both geniuses in our material fields, but we can't speak to each other and make each other understood. So tell me, for everybody that's on the line, because many of them are from advertising, but many of them are also from publishing, okay, which side is the buy side and which side is the sell side? Because in publishers, they have the opposite view to the advertising market. So from your perspective, which side is buy side?
Oh, it's actually interesting. I'm going to deviate a little bit from that one, because it's something that I've been stuck on. I actually studied marketing. I loved marketing since I was a kid. I think I'm one of those weird people, and I studied it. And I feel like in the digital ads world, one of the few people who actually studied marketing. I encountered very few like me. And what I now, again, in hindsight, I see, like, we built this industry. Basically, engineers and business people built this industry, not marketers. And we violated the fundamentals of marketing science every single day, and increasingly so. Just looking at sort of numbers on a spreadsheet and lines on a graph. And so I think in terms of the language, publishers, probably the supply side was probably a little bit closer to what they'd always done. But eventually they also followed what the numbers on a spreadsheet said. And engineers came in and engineered their whatever their solutions to maximize their revenue without necessarily losing sight probably a little bit of how they're supposed to balance users and advertisers.
Yeah, and I think that in the publishing industry, because I'm on the other side of that conversation, some very, very interesting things happen. So I'll try and set the scene. So we, early on in the digital era as publishers, we had enormous audiences. We had some knowledge of our users. We sold direct. It was very manual. It was spreadsheets and meetings and, very, very inefficient. But it did work because we could protect our CPMs. We had limited volume of inventory to sell. And as a result, we could build P&Ls and have a confident view on whether we were going to get to where we needed to. And if we could see, somebody was underperforming, we replaced them. And that was just a simple business. Where it got a little bit unstuck was when people tried to make this more efficient and make it cheaper and automate the process. But the news industry chose not to do that. It chose to hand that job over to somebody else. And the very first time, I remember the meetings when Google arrived and said, "We've developed programmatic, we're going to solve this for you." The answer was, "Yes, absolutely, that's great. I can fire all that sales team out there." And we handed the keys of the kingdom to somebody else, assuming that they saw the world the same way as we did. We assumed they also spoke fluent French. Do you think that that was a mistake? I mean, I'm talking about, at the time of the DoubleClick acquisition and the year after.
Yeah, it was a mistake. In hindsight, it's very easy to see. Although I do look at, I think a lot of this market, I think about search and I think about programmatic. When it first started, there was probably some truth and effectiveness to it. Right? Thinking about some remnant inventory that was not going to get unsold. And all of a sudden now you could activate it and bring in some higher yield. That all made sense. The problem was that it was the slippery slope. And so in hindsight, it's easy to say, oh, this was a trap and we shouldn't have taken it. The question is actually, could you have sort of gotten the good without letting it be this runaway disaster of some sorts?
Look, I have a million views on this, but I'm going to throw to Alan. Go ahead.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is remnant is great when it's 10% of your sales. When it starts eating up, and it's what, I don't even know what the number is, but once it gets to be more than 50% of your sales, you're in some real trouble. And then you're sort of co-opted into the game of deception, where for a while it was like, well, yeah, it's below the fold, but we're still going to charge for that. And then that sort of incentivized a whole game of where it wasn't even about media anymore; it was about data collection. And so then if I'm a publisher, at some point you have to wonder, like, what business are we really in? We've seeded the ad sales side of it. We've enabled dozens, if not hundreds, of third-party entities to collect data on our site, in part because each of them gave us a nickel. But at what point does the whole thing sort of blow up? And I think that's really the central premise of today's discussion, because as Ricky aptly framed, if ad spend continues to rise, and it's risen, boy, I've been in this for 25 years. It has risen every year, and every year seems to get better. But at some point, and I bet you that was sometime right around the DoubleClick acquisition, at some point, the percentage that publishers took out of that growth got smaller and smaller. And so I guess my question is, where are you seeing growth right now in digital media, and why? And is all of it ultimately going to the platforms, to right now, Meta, Google, and Amazon in particular?
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't looked at this in a while, but I'll speak to a couple of things. And I think going back, what we essentially did when we invented programmatic is we took media, which was a commodity, but it was a differentiated commodity. And we made it an undifferentiated one, right? An advertiser was just looking for a cookie on a site, and they didn't really care where it was. And at the time, there were no MFAs, but as soon as someone invented this sort of concept, that's what took over. And so going back to your question now, where I think the growth is actually happening, and I think where it's going to happen, is in this concept of more quality publishers. I took a crack because there are a lot of people talking about the open web, and is the open web dying, or the open web is going to be great and everyone has their own interests. I think we sort of do ourselves a disservice by saying it's the open web, or the walled gardens, the platforms, whatever it is. It's actually three different. We have to break it out now. And so to me, there's the undifferentiated open web, like the sort of fully open long tail. And then you have the quality part of the web. Now, the web is not just text-based. It's any digital-based media that is differentiated, that is can command not necessarily a premium, but they have something that is differentiated in some way that a buyer can't necessarily get a full scale of elsewhere, or maybe they can't get it all elsewhere. And so I do think we're going to see a ton of growth. People call this like hedged gardens. And so you can think about properties that have unique media and maybe unique data, and they don't open it up fully. This isn't sort of the free-for-all Wild West open programmatic world. It doesn't make sense for them to probably offer it there. But they are able to sort of command that. And I think we are going to see growth from those companies that have sort of pulled out from this. We're not going to play in that undifferentiated commodity space.
Fascinating. I'm really heartened to hear that. I really hope that happens. I think it's long overdue. I'd be delighted. You're actually the third person from the ad industry to tell me that you think that is about to happen. It feels a bit like a rebound. So I can tell you very clearly that when I was at a global publisher, when programmatic first arrived, the director of ad sales ran into my office, closed the door, and just said, the greatest thing has just happened. All of our ad selling problems are solved. There's this magic money-making machine product coming called programmatic. We're going to need far less people. We're going to be able to sell all our inventory. Any dollar is a good dollar. And I was like, let me stop you there. Yeah, let me just stop you there. The P&L doesn't say any dollar is a good dollar, because if it costs us $2.50 to sell it, that's a problem. Or if the CPM of the ad falls so low, we end up losing money on everything that we do. And where is this new magic product coming from? And he said, Google. And I was like, hasn't really worked for us so far. Let's see. But literally within 2.5 years of that first meeting, okay, the sales force was a quarter of the size it was. And the quarter that I still had left literally walked in the office at 7 a.m, turned on Google, went through all of Google's numbers, used all of their data to try and sell advertising, reported to me with Google data, and then went home at 5 o'clock, turning off Google. So they worked for Google all day. And I said to them one time, look, you seem to be working for Google on my costs. What do you think? And then not a year later, I'd left the business, but a year later, they handed over all sales to Google 100%. And the entire sales team was removed from a global media company. And so it was, for a desperate industry, a solution, right? But it required them to trust that it would work for them, and it hasn't. And so I think that that's been the real world experience publisher side. Yeah. And yet, despite this, 80% of all the world's publishers and 4 in 5 of their ads come through this network.
Isn't that because Google also owns the demand? And so you have to use Google as from a supply standpoint. You have to use their ad server because if you don't, your ability to access their demand goes down. And so at some point, it became a little bit of a Hobson's choice. It's die now or die slowly over a number of years. And most publishers chose the latter. Do you disagree with that, Aris?
I know, but I think it's a little bit bigger. It's certainly a factor, but I think it's not just Google's demand; it's all of the demand. All of the demand had already decided they want they want vanity metrics, and they want them for as cheap as possible. That's how they measure, and it doesn't matter if they buy through DV360 or even non-programmatic. And so this sort of idea of this undifferentiated commodity, once that became the way that buyers demand flowed, what option did publishers have? And they had some options, but it wasn't an easy option. And a couple have taken it, and I think others will. But the idea of, if you, let's say you have, let's say you're Bloomberg or you're the FT, right? You have really high quality media, something really unique, and buyers are going to come and get it. If you just left the auction, you just left programmatic, the demand doesn't just flow. You have to then go and sell it. You then have to go and tell everyone, hey, my stuff is worth more. You can't buy it the way that you would like to buy it, and you can't get it for as cheap. I know you think you can reach these sort of like high net worth individuals that are really influential on these other sites that are in programmatic, but mine are verified and they're better, and my ads are higher attention, whatever that is. You have to go and work at it. And how many publishers, and not even just the publisher is a big entity. We talk about it like a singular. It's plural. There's a lot of individuals who the CRO, the CEO, is going to say, yes, we're going to make, first of all, that capital investment, potentially hiring a bunch of salespeople, potentially taking a risk of a quarter of not hitting our numbers, maybe longer. And so who's brave enough to go and make that decision? And I think some publishers wisely did. Bloomberg and the FT and others got out of that game. I don't know how much the FT was in that game before, but how many others were brave enough to, and really do have that unique value to go and stand up and say, hey, don't buy me on sort of these cheap vanity metrics. You have to value me and consider me differently.
So can you define what you mean by vanity metrics? I love the term, and I have a sense of what you mean, but can you expand upon that, please?
Yes. So vanity metrics, it's generally speaking, and it's tough because it's a little bit of a moving target. I think about it as ones that have been gamed. And so when viewability first came out, I don't think it was a vanity metric because it did actually wipe out all of this unviewable inventory. And so buying something viewable was worth more. But eventually viewability got gamed so much that it's pretty much meaningless. I'd rather have a viewable impression than a non-viewable, but just because it's viewable tells me almost nothing about its actual value. And so the most common vanity metrics that are still used today are things that have been gamed and don't factor in quality in my view. So reach, so undifferentiated reach, just like how many times we reach those people, an impression, a viewable impression, and completed views. Completed views are a really big one because completion rate or completed view, once upon a time, most video on the internet, and this is a long time ago, but it was basically YouTube and Dailymotion and these sites that were video sites. You went there to watch video. And so you watch the pre-roll ad, the mid-roll ad, before, during, after. once Outstream was invented, and so you had all of these ads showing up, they're small, they're muted, they have really high completion rates, all of a sudden that metric means nothing on its own. You can add that with other metrics. How big was the ad? Was the sound on? Once you combine those things, then you get a little bit more into quality measures.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I ran video at News Corp, and I've also run video at many other companies. And my last company worked with 200 broadcasters and publishers around the world moving video. It was contextually relevant, top of the page, click to play, hyper premium. I'm talking Bloomberg click to play, sound on video at the top of an article directly under the headline on the Wall Street Journal. Yeah. Couldn't sell it. And so it was viewed as, too small, too niche, but the performance was unbelievable. The completion rate of a 3-minute video was 80%. The click to play rate, it was 40 odd percent. Yeah. And so, our argument was always, well, which bit of this not being good enough am I missing? Comes back to those vanity metrics. That's what I eventually got the sense was that we can't measure it the same way as everything else we're buying. Therefore, it feels like a risk to buy it, even though we accept it's probably great. You kind of find yourself stuck between two stools. I want to do the best job I possibly can for the consumer and the advertiser, but it doesn't fit the market I'm in.
That's what I grinded out for many years at Google. And so the concept of sort of attention measurement is what I latched onto while I was there, because I saw these vanity metrics and I said, oh, attention based, right? Good proxies to attention, likely to drive better impact. But I realized very quickly that buyers could not just switch their metrics. We had to prove that it actually drove higher value for them in terms of whatever outcomes that they care about, and real outcomes, not attribution and things like that. And that was a grind. That was really tough before the market was really talking about attention, especially.
And when in a publisher, the sales team were given the job of trying to sell that video inventory, actually, I heard two things that collided that really alarmed me. The first of them was any dollar is a good dollar, which you heard me mention a minute ago. The second one was we have to grow traffic. We don't have enough traffic. And there was a perspective within less experienced people in the business, and certainly in the sales team, that the only way we could earn more money was to generate more page views. And so to your point, we hired SEO people. We spent enormous amounts of money on SEO to try and game the system. We wrote tons more content to try and get more page views to sell. None of these things led to any more revenue. What we did was we increased costs and we diminished the quality of our product. And we effectively diluted our message to our audience, all in a chase for low-yielding programmatic ads, which were falling faster than we could build. And the whole thing just broke. And I think that's been at the center of this problem. But I want to come back to something you said earlier on, because it sounds to me like you think that there's a turning point here. There's a transition, a transformational moment. Can you please tell publishers, because I think there's people who are crying into their tea or are going to put their cup down and go, hell yeah, let's do this. Because I think there's enough energy to fight back, but they need a North Star.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. One is this is going back 6-7 years probably, when I really started to understand what was happening. And I said then, it's inevitable that this will change, right? A market is always either going to find some efficiency, right? It's going to correct itself and find a way to be more efficient, or it's going to get so inefficient that it kind of breaks on its own. Something is going to happen. Something has to give. Unfortunately, it's not fixed itself, which means it's gotten a lot worse. And I've seen it. I saw it over many years, still see it today. It's much more inefficient, or at least the size of it. Of the waste is sort of significantly bigger right now. So I always believed that it was inevitable. I was never willing to make a prediction when that would happen. When I started getting more optimistic that this was getting close to inevitable, I still, only until recently, I said it was inevitable. When cookies were announced to be going away, seemed to be this aha moment, or a waking up moment. All of the advertisers and the agencies that I used to go to every single day and say, hey, let's test attention metrics. This will prove better. Look at these case studies and things like that. But I know you have to prove it. And most of them would not respond. But once cookies were announced to be going away, everyone knew that the musical chairs were going to end. and that they need to start thinking about what that alternative plan is for how they're going to measure the value of media. The second piece, which I'm biased to, but I still think is a really big one, is the reclassification of in-stream video. And so, if you're aware, basically all of the small little video ads, the thumbnails that you see on most websites, there was a very vague definition that the IAB had, or not very vague, but vague enough that there was enough gray area. They mostly classified themselves as in-stream, which buyers assume is this premium, YouTube TV-like video experience. I went to the IAB, got them, they were sort of working on new guidelines. I suggested that it was time to update that definition. They were open to the proposal. We got it through, which was to be in-stream, the sound has to be on. So that basically overnight, there was like a little bit of revisions, but in OpenRTB 2.6 that came out about 2 years ago, that's the new spec, which is now to be in-stream, the sound has to be on. That has not been fully complied with by everyone in the industry. There's probably some that have, some big ones that haven't. And as far as I understand, Google is still one of the holdouts that is not fully complied. And I do believe that when that happens, it will sort of force the market to stop pretending. Actually, to your point earlier about the video that you were selling, I always give this example. If CNN is trying to sell their in-stream to a buyer, or a buyer comes to them and says, I want to buy your in-stream, right? Your sound on, your really good stuff. And CNN says, yeah, sure, it's $50 for this PMP. That buyer is saying, that's too expensive for me. Like, okay, I need to have it on my plan. I know the buyer wants this, whatever this is. Sure, I'm going to buy a little bit, but I can get $10 in-stream in the open auction. And so I'm not going to buy that much from you. The reality is they're not buying in-stream in the open auction. They're buying something that they actually don't want to buy. They're buying small muted ads, which I don't think is worth zero to most buyers maybe, but worth less. And so they're overpaying for something that they might not even want at all. And I think when that fake in-stream disappears, it's going to force buyers to say, oh, I guess I need to pay CNN that $50. Maybe actually it's going to be more than $50 at this point, because there's going to be real supply scarcity. So I'm still hopeful that will make the change. And I'll come back, but I'll pause for a second because I have one other sort of like case for optimism.
I just before you do, I just have to say, I was at a publisher conference in Oslo a few years ago, and I went and saw that painting, the scream, the picture. That's how I feel when you say that, because the idea that, publishers go to enormous dangers for a lot of the stuff that they write. That video that we're publishing might have been shot by one of our reporters in Gaza, okay, to tell the news. A lot has gone into that behind the scenes. And I'm not trying to say that we need to be treated as a special case, but I think we should be treated as a special case because it's something entirely different. It's not a cheap and nasty cut and pasted video running at the bottom of the page in Outbrain. And so to try and get the industry to recognize that speaking to the audience there is different to speaking to the audience programmatically has systematically and comprehensively failed for the best part of more than a decade. And that's why the news doesn't get covered anymore. But I'm hearing optimism. I want to hear more of it.
I just have a quick question, because there seems to be a level of cognitive dissonance here. So the buyer, the ad buyer, and the people at the agency, they all use the internet, right? I know that's a dumb question, but it seems like most of them do. And if anything, tend to skew higher on the techie side and have been, both legs in for, 20 years. Okay, so they visit websites, they see these horrible, horrible video ad experiences, and then they get to work and they start buying. What is it they think they're getting? And is the issue that they don't care what they're getting?
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is the idea of vanity metrics. Alan, I told you this, and Ricky, you'll especially appreciate this as a journalist. I read this truism not long ago. The author was talking about journalism as a profession, but when I heard it, when I read it, I said, this applies to our advertising industry just as much. And he said, if you want to get rich in this industry, lie to people who want to be lied to. And if you want to make a living, tell the truth to people who want to hear the truth. And if you want to be poor, tell the truth to people who want to be lied to. And so the vast majority of people in this industry, and they're not bad people, their job is to pass information along that their boss will say, good job. And so I can tell you my ROI was good. I can tell you my completion rate was X, and you'll be happy. And guess what? And I saw this myself. I saw this within Google, and I saw this elsewhere. When I go to my boss, right? Not my specific boss, but bosses and people, and I say, hey guys, this completion rate is kind of BS. Look at that. There's these small ads. I wasn't rewarded for that. There was a time actually at Google where I was rewarded for coming and bringing up some of these things, and they did really care. But at some point, no, it's, hey, their boss doesn't care about that stuff. They want to be told about a thing that's probably going to cause them a headache, maybe lose some money, maybe they get in trouble because they missed this thing or whatever it is. And that's true everywhere. Not everywhere. I think there are exceptions, but I think that's the challenge we're dealing with, because the lie can pass.
When do you think that was, that transition point?
It's really hard to put my finger on it. I mean, I joined Google in 2010, fairly young, really, I don't think naive. I really believed in it in a lot of ways. And I saw it. I saw this don't be evil manifested everywhere around me, up and down, left and right. Execs really felt like if I went outside of the bounds of what was sort of moral and ethical, I'd have my hand slapped and shamed, and you sort of like, this scarlet letter. That was also at a time where Google was going to make money and make Wall Street really happy no matter what. And so there wasn't, the pressure was like, try to sell this other product, but if it doesn't work, like, do what's right for the customer. And that was good. But eventually the pressure mounts, we have more competition. The expectations from Wall Street are higher. And so slowly but surely people start to cut corners. And eventually people lose that sort of, they start to be like, oh, well, this is actually how it works. And I don't think it was always like that, but it slowly transitioned. And it's unfortunate because actually all my friends, like everyone there, they're good people and they really believe in don't be evil. They don't think they're doing anything wrong, and they probably aren't as an individual. They just say, hey, this is a systemic problem. And the in-stream, outstream thing is a perfect example, because whenever I raised this internally at Google or elsewhere, everyone understandably said, this is a systemic problem. Like, it's really hard to solve. And I agreed with them until it was reclassified. And then all of a sudden, this should be an easier problem to solve. And the fact that it wasn't that was the beginning of the end for my time there.
Alan?
I would love to get back to the what are the solutions for publishers? Because I think you were going to make a point about cookies. But I don't know if there was another point.
Yeah. So I guess I'll give another sort of like meta for like my case for optimism, and then maybe get a little bit more into the practical. I won't get sort of too deep on that, but the other case for optimism, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I've always been like the optimist, like half optimist, half pessimist, and I say things that. To people in this industry that do want to see the change, and they say, oh, we've been saying that for 20 years and 5 years ago and blah, blah, blah. And it's all fair and valid. But I was thinking about, like, there are some clear signals that things are changing. And I've been for a year plus, the amount of conversations that we're hearing about quality, about buyers sort of being frustrated, upset, sort of seeing proof of them moving to different ways to measure, not believing platform metrics and things like that. But to me, actually, one of the more promising signs is even Google making sort of the steps to move away from simplistic attribution, right? Not betting on MMM, telling all these stories about long-term brand advertising, the benefits of brand plus performance. Facebook is obviously doing the same thing with their MMM. To me, those are strong indicators that they know that what has worked for them in the past is not going to sort of succeed, or not going to be able to carry all of their weight moving forward. And so when you have them on board to transition, to me, that's a really promising sign. Now, that doesn't mean money necessarily just trickles back into the open web, but I do think that they've sort of prevented that because the attribution systems and everything was sort of built up by the systems and the mousetrap that they'd built.
Right, but in fairness, when you have a platform that is built largely on user-generated content at this point, um, your ability to you really need to be able to demonstrate that there's a brand lift to watching kids dance around on TikTok or whatever. I mean, you just really need to make that a concerted effort because and then part and parcel of that, there's a separate, how do we turn ourselves into an e-com engine so that the influencer dancing around on TikTok when he or she is selling whatever, that we get a cut of that.
They're going to have to monetize in every single way possible. So they're going to want to take credit for the mental availability, and then anytime that they can connect it to a sale, or especially if they can sort of take direct credit and take a cut of it, or just take credit for it and say our media helped drive that, and so you should spend more on our media. They're going to do all of those things.
I'm going to give you a job, Arez. Here you go. I'm going to pay you $1.5 million a year with a 30% bonus for hitting your targets quarterly. Okay? I was offered that the other day. I'm going to give you that job. It's at a global publisher. You have money to spend. You have to pivot the business away from programmatic to direct. You have to generate the best part of $50 million a year in revenue. Okay? And you've got an audience that's of 350 million known users and another 500 million partially known users. What do you do?
Knowing what the publisher is, and you don't have to obviously name the publisher, but
it would be in the top 5 American publishers you'd think of.
So
wow, Time Magazine? Oh, wait.
Come on, let's solve this problem.
So I think there's I have a couple of views on where the industry is going and where publishers will benefit, but certain types of publishers. And this is where I think we bisect a few different things. What I mentioned before, like the totally open web versus the partially open web, the hedge gardens, whatever we want to call that. If you're in that premium space, then absolutely you've got something to play with. Now let's put AI aside for now, because I do think that is going to be very disruptive to commoditized media. I will delve into this now, but something I think about, like if you're a recipe site and you make recipes that are somewhat generic, right? It's turkey chili and whatever else, and maybe it's cutesy and you have a nice little audience, but your recipes are somewhat interchangeable. I don't know how well you're going to be able to monetize moving forward. And even without AI, I didn't think you should. I think most of those sites have been over monetized, right? Because they run small little video ads in the bottom, advertisers overpay for them, and that money should have gone to CNN, or that should have gone to a more premium publisher that had a real in-stream or something else. And so I wasn't betting on those companies, and I felt sad about that. For a long time, I tried to protect sort of the robustness of the open web, and then I realized, like, it's not a right. The monetization of your content is not a right by any means. You have to earn it. And I think too many didn't earn it and took it away from publishers that really did probably deserve it and earn it. So some of those are going to be falling away. There's probably some really quality content that I would like to stay, but is probably under threat by AI. And I'm going to put that aside for now. I do think that there is, I have an example here, and I'll get into it. My vision, and I think this is an inevitable change that's going to come into this industry, and I'm really excited about it. Just waiting for someone to actually do it. You probably have a number of subscriptions to different news sites, as do I. But like most people, I have subscription fatigue. I don't really want to subscribe to anymore, and I can't. Like, if I subscribe to another publication, I could probably go there once or twice a month. So The Atlantic is one. the example I always use. I like going to the Atlantic. I like reading about 2 articles a month on the Atlantic that I can sort of dedicate my time for a long read. And they're fantastic, but I'm not going to spend the $10, $20 a month just for those 2 articles. So when I go to the Atlantic now, they tell me to subscribe or scram. And what I think they are going to do, and they should do, I do think this is inevitable, is I'm going to go to that site and they're going to say, hey, thanks for coming here. We appreciate that you like our journalism. It costs us money to produce this. In order to access this article, you will need to either subscribe, you can give us a micropayment, or you can watch this ad. And I think that is that sort of unlock with an ad, like the way you would get Wi-Fi at the airport, is a form of payment that we have not really explored. We maybe explored it in the past. Everyone says, oh, we used to do this, rewarded. I think that we're in a new era where I think the sort of that, decommoditizing the media landscape and the high attention of those ads, right? It's almost like an in-stream ad. It's going to be sound on, full attention. You can potentially collect somebody's information. The Atlantic, what they should do is say, Erez, you can watch this ad and get this article, or give us your email, and then we'll actually let you get 3 articles after you watch this ad. And then all of a sudden, there's a relationship that we build. What I ultimately attribute this to, and I've heard a few people sort of talk about this in different contexts, the fundamental lie of the internet was that it was free, and it was never free. We were always giving up our data and or our attention to ads, whether we were paying attention or not, but it was this implicit trade-off. And I think we need to shift. I think we're going to shift to a much more explicit trade-off with consent. And whether that's consent of give us your data, or we're going to use your data, or give us your time, your attention to an ad, maybe fill out a survey. And so I think those kinds of publishers, if you're just giving the sports score, I'm not going to stay on that site. I can probably just get that from Google. But if you're giving me sort of in-depth journalism, I like this writer, I feel comfortable, this is my local news, I want to sort of have this information, and I want the relationship, I also want to support them, then absolutely I will watch the ad, and maybe I will eventually subscribe because I realize I'm getting a lot of value from it. So that's, if that's worth $1.5 million, I'm happy to join this publisher to help them.
There's a very strong view in the publishing industry at the highest levels that there's going to be a death of the middle in publishing, what you're talking about. So because of programmatic, the media redrew itself over the last 15 years to focus on page views over the product, and hired SEO people faster than they hired journalists. I mean, that's just a fact. Yeah. So I've worked in newsrooms, or I've been in newsrooms where they have more people working on SEO than they do on the stories. It's absolute madness putting the cart before the horse. But what we're now going to see, in my opinion, and I'm asking you if you think I've interpreted this right, is that those mass, non-differentiated, high volume, stack it high, sell it cheap Walmart news sites effectively don't have much of an existence in a world where programmatic diminishes a bit, Google comes under more pressure. That feels like a difficult place to play. And what the really big thinkers at the very, very top of media are thinking is that the world probably, in terms of news, collapses into 6 to 10 global, massive, very high quality subscription-based brands. That's where the world goes, and there's a death of the middle. Do you think that's about right?
Not really, because I don't think that those businesses, like, there's enough people that want access to those big 6, and I don't think they hold out and say only if you're a subscriber. And so I think there is going to be a much more interesting model where people are able to access information, that content, without necessarily paying a subscription. Maybe consider TV and sort of that super premium aside, but certainly the text-based web. And I think that middle is, there's value there. People do still want to go and consume that content. Maybe they're not loyal to that publisher, but I do think that there's plenty there to survive. It's just a matter of, are you differentiated? Are you offering enough value to your users that they can't get elsewhere for free or without watching an ad? with some other sort of trade-off. And I think that's where, yeah, go ahead on.
No, I was about to agree with you. The one additional data point, and it's kind of a big one, with respect to the middle is going to be AI, because the middle does not have the money to take OpenAI and Perplexity and Google to court. And that's really, I think, if we're going to talk about the demise of the big middle, I think that's going to ultimately be the thing that leads us there. Because I agree with a lot of the other stuff that you were saying, but I just unless we get a rational view in terms of conceptually that content creators need to be paid, even if their content is used via AI. And then second, if we can eliminate the Section 230 liability shield for generative AI, which is, to me at least, a very clear reuse of content that shouldn't be afforded those protections. If we can address those two things, then I think the big middle has got a shot. But without them, I don't know.
After many years in journalism now, when you start your career, you say, I want to be a reporter, right? And when you get older and you've been around for a while, you want to be a journalist. And there's a gulf of a difference between being a reporter and a journalist. And that's the difference between the middle and the premium. See, if there's an earthquake and you write down there's been an earthquake, okay, that article probably, with a tiny degree of difference, is published 20 million times on 20 million URLs, and it's the same thing. But the journalism that you find in the Wall Street Journal or the journalism that you find in the Times of London is something that you don't find anywhere else. They go and find that out and they publish it and they discover it, and that's journalism. And that, unfortunately, has been defunded at the same time as reporting's been defunded. And they're two distinct things to my mind. And so we want more journalism because we want to have more deeper knowledge about things in the world. But at the moment, that doesn't work from an advertising model. That's why people have gone to subscription. But the problem with subscription, in my opinion, is that it denies access to that to only the people that can afford it, which changes the democratization of information. That leads to a less informed world, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think this is where it gets pretty interesting. So I, of course, fully agree with you, right? The world is better with journalism, investigative and otherwise. We need it, right? Democracy doesn't work without it. And it's part of the reason I am so passionate about making these fixes. But I generally, almost universally, my appeal is entirely based off of what gives advertisers the most economic value. I do not appeal to their better angels. I don't tell them, hey, this is going to give publishers more money in their pocket, or this saves journalism or democracy or anything else. The question is this more valuable for you and the objectives that you have? And I strongly believe that for the most part, most quality, higher quality media, including journalism, does actually perform better for advertising objectives. The advertising objectives just have not been measured correctly. And so if you're just looking for cheap clicks and views, it's not that they don't work, but you can get them cheaper elsewhere. And so, but if you think about somebody reading some investigative journalism, they're spending more time on the page. Generally, someone who spends more time on the page spends more time on the ads, right? They're actually much more attentive. It's not this sort of fleeting, like you're thinking about scrolling through, a listicle or on social media. And so if buyers were actually valuing the quality of those impressions of that media, the ad placements, not the media, there is also a case to make that an ad on the New York Times seen for the exact number of seconds as one on an MFA site is worth more, because there's sort of this, halo effect. But just the fact that those placements actually do capture more attention, more resonance, they're more relevant, whatever that is. When buyers recognize that, I believe we'll see quality publishers, quality news get rewarded.
What happens? How does that happen? Is it that the vanity metrics need to be overlooked? Is it that publishers need to hire direct sales teams? Is that they need to provide better, more trusted measurement? I guess it's all of them, is it?
It's all of them. I see it happening the most. I think most advanced is with the attention measurement, sort of like part of ad tech. And so there's a number of companies specifically on attention and ones in adjacent areas that are moving towards better measures of the quality of the media, of the placements and things like that, or the more effectiveness, the higher effectiveness of that media. And so not looking at attribution, looking at something that is a little bit more, MMMs are not granular enough. And so I don't generally bank on them, but I do think that they point out where, search is probably overvalued. I do think we're going to see big shifts from massively overvalued channels. That money should flow, and hopefully media quality as the sort of, I don't want to say it's the main currency, but it's certainly going to be one of those things, and more so than completed views, and more so than view through conversions that have sort of driven a lot of the ad dollars today.
So go on, Anne.
It's funny. This is just a thought, Ricky, and maybe we should have somebody on from Arbitron who goes back to the day. I remember like 25 years ago, somebody got Arbitron to rethink their methodology for who was listening to the radio. And everybody agreed that this new methodology was really, really accurate. And then all of a sudden they realized that a whole bunch of artists who we thought were really popular, it turns out that they weren't so popular. And a whole bunch of R&B and hip hop artists who had been almost completely ignored by radio up until that point. Turns out that they were a lot more popular than they were given credit for. So maybe we have a similar rebirth within the digital media space.
So I'm thinking about the real world lived experience on the floor of that media company that's trying to keep the lights on. And I'm talking about the real top of the tree. For that to happen, what you've just described, Erez, to happen, at the moment, there seems to be virtually no ad demand that doesn't come from Google. It seems incredibly hard to find it. Is Google not going to ring fence that for its owned and operated sites, or is it genuinely going to become available to the premium end of the market? And why would Google allow that to happen?
You're asking about YouTube?
Well, it might be YouTube for video, but equally though, Google might self-preference the search query for tell me about this amazing story in the Wall Street Journal and send the ad there and not send it to the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, I don't think about search too much. It's just not that transferable. It's this just sort of like pull at the bottom of the funnel. Not always, but generally speaking, I don't think Google is going to change anything on search besides Gemini reactions and things like that. YouTube is the premium media that they have, right? This is where I think is super undervalued. I made that case for many years. I think YouTube is undervalued again because of this sort of like fake in-stream that's out there, and so they can't command the CPMs that the true supply and demand sort of imbalance would dictate. And so I don't see them making any changes, and I don't think it's dependent on them. It would always boost if they do. What I do think they are going to support this because they want YouTube to be properly valued. In this world where attribution doesn't work, in this world where search potentially decreases, YouTube is their last hope in a sense, certainly of the growth story. And so I think they're going to get the market to say, oh, we shouldn't use just attribution. We should look at brand lift and quality and things like that. I don't know that they'll talk about quality, but that's going to boost publishers that also say, hey, yeah, you know what? Don't judge us based off of a viewable impression. Look at us based on the attention score or something else of this media. Try to do some brand lift and see if you run on this basket of high quality news sites versus this basket of long tail nothing, or even just YouTube. What's that performance delta?
So got a question on that. So why would Google not consider premium news content to be a separate advertising product? Why would it not be considered outside the general programmatic mix? I understand that the metrics say, okay, well, the performance of this inventory is higher, the earnings of these people are higher, the measurability of these people is high. We know why they're there. The contextuality is good. The brand safety is very, very high. This is a place. Why would you not just say, all right, well, let's just agree that there's a minimum CPM for that of X and we will support publishers in this list? Why would they not just do something like that?
Generally speaking, I think a lot of this, and just I've seen it elsewhere too, within Google and outside of Google, is they've got a basket of, that they're selling. And a lot of it is really low quality, and they don't really want anyone to differentiate between the really good stuff and then the large volume of questionable stuff. And I think this is true just within YouTube itself. There's not a lot of transparency about what you're getting. There's some, but do you know on YouTube TV who's watching music videos for hours on end on their TV and maybe not actually watching versus who's actually sitting down and watching for an hour a certain show and seeing all of those ads? They don't want you to know, and that's true of sort of most networks. And so I don't see that being any different here. Unfortunately, they've sort of built up so much revenue into that long tail that it's really difficult to sort of make that switch out.
Well, and there's also a very big company with competing and at times conflicting interests. And so, what might be
I saw
interesting
that
to
too.
watch, yeah, but what might be interesting to watch over time is like, what happens if, there are divestments within Google? What happens if, all or part of the DoubleClick ad tech stack is divested? What if you lose Chrome? What if some other steps are taken? Does Google then, almost immediately come out and say, well, yeah, the big metric now is X, and everybody should follow X. Maybe they change their mind if somebody is maybe able to simplify things for them a little bit.
I absolutely think that will happen. There is definitely a sort of the conflict within Google, not just buy and sell side, but certainly with search and YouTube and all these different pieces that don't all benefit in unison. And there's what I saw basically is sort of this vetocracy. If one entity wants to do something and it benefits them, but they know it's going to hurt another entity within Google, there's sort of this like, no, you can't do it. Now, eventually, if that one entity says like, no, this is really important, it escalates, it gets to the top, and then somebody really, really senior can make that sort of break that tie and decide what decision gets made. But things get slowed down, and sometimes things don't happen at all because of that sort of that conflict.
Do you think that Google, on the other side of the breakup, will be glad it happened? Do you think it frees it to be innovative again? Do you think it's more valuable in parts than it is as a single entity as it is today?
Man, that's so hard to say. There were times that I would have said yes. I do. My gut tells me that it has grown. A lot of the growth has been overvalued. So like, oh, there was always some waste and some level of overvaluation, and most of the growth has actually it's been become less effective, less productive of media dollars going in. And so at some point it reaches a point where it's like actually breaking it out it's not to say that there's still a lot of value there, but it's also weighed down by a lot of stuff that looks good, but is it going to continue to look good if we shift to new measurement or if cookies go away or if it's just not part of the whole?
But from what I heard you say, YouTube's probably the net winner overall in being freed. Yeah.
Big time.
And I'm not. Yeah, I agree, but I also think there's almost a Bell Labs analogy here, in that if you start breaking up those pieces, and this probably isn't ever going to happen. I think our best case right now is Chrome and the DoubleClick ad tech stack. But if you really start breaking out different parts of that company, I think you'll see innovation in a whole bunch of places. And that 10 years from now, we'll be talking about, the need to break up, divisions, 6 and 23 of Google, of the company formerly known as Google.
Will they pivot and make the most of it? Absolutely. Like I would have faith that they have the pieces and they have the audience and the numbers and the technology and the war chest. And so can they do it? Absolutely. But on day one, do the parts add up to more than what the sum is right now? I'm not sure.
How chaotic do you think the market's going to be in this breakup as it happens? How disruptive is it going to be, buy side and publisher side, do you think?
I don't know what does a breakup look like. Like I think it depends. Is it the sell side spinning out? It's a little hard to know. I don't prognosticate too much because I think there's too many different ways that could play out.
That's a fair answer. I don't think anybody knows yet. Go on, Anne.
Yeah, I would venture a guess. I mean, I think the double-click ad tech stack, I get that there's multiple components of that, but I think that you can break off certainly the buy side from that, and you can certainly, and I think that can become a standalone thing that and others will in the short term take advantage of the chaos over there, because the thing that we're not talking about is that there is a fair amount of bloat within Google, and not just people doing multiple functions. You just have people who have gotten a little fat and happy, whether they're really looking to work hard again is, I think, a debatable point. Some of them are, some of them probably are not. As we get older, we tend to prefer to rest on our laurels a little bit more. And then the Chrome breakup is really, really a fascinating one, because if Chrome is divested, and if we can get we can get more places to have anti-preferencing measures so that the browser isn't able to just independently create its own ad platform and do whatever the heck they want, I think we'll be really cooking with gas.
So, Rez, I offered you a very, very, very valuable job just now. Can I just come back to that on the closeout? So you're in the interview, you're asked to put down 3 bullet points that are transformational for a publisher in the world as you see it. Okay, 3 things. What would they be?
Pull out of programmatic, and sales and marketing. It's those 3 pieces. Sort of go and prove the value to the buyers. Tell them, and then prove to them the value of your media outside of the vanity metrics that they were previously using. Explain why your audience is unique. It's not something that they can find elsewhere. I think that's the clearest way to do it. I obviously described how I think with users, engaging with them more and getting them to sort of consent, right? Like to really want to buy in, to support you as a publisher. I think those are probably the 2 most important things that most normal publishers should do to get out of that sort of race to the bottom.
Life will be better after the divorce, right? Which publisher do you think does it best? That's my last question.
So I don't know, because I was never on like the publisher side. Even when I was on AdX, I was sort of still at like the exchange level. So just what I see in the news, right? I see Bloomberg and I see the FT and I see sort of other publishers like that that said they're leaving open auction, which everyone was shocked at first. And I'm guessing it worked very well for them. And I think there's just going to be more of an opportunity for that to happen moving forward.
Alan, last word?
I just want to say thank you. This was a great discussion. And at some point, I want to return to 2 things. We don't have to do it here. I want to talk about how cookies going away benefits publishers and the ecosystem as a whole. And then secondly, I want to hear from Ricky why you turned down that job. We don't have to do that now.
I've got lots of publishers to help, Alan, not just one. Amazing. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you coming on. Rez, I've really enjoyed it. I don't get enough time to sit and talk with ex-Googlers, and I'd like to do it more. Thankfully, there's more of them now, so that makes it easier. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll see you again soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.